Good afternoon, everyone, and I really appreciate this kind invitation to speak with you today, to join you. I've enjoyed this conference, and it just gives me a window into the enormous talent there is in this state, and I'm happy to be now in my second year as a Texan. So I have followed the progress of TAMEST since its founding, and I have to salute the insightful members of the National Academy and one very determined senator, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who made this all happen. When I was the executive officer at the Institute of Medicine, we would often talk about this group and as an example for what can be done and what should be done at the state level. And I'm only in my second year here as a Texan, and as I was just telling Ernie, that as an employee of the National Academies, I couldn't be elected to the National Academies, and they've decided that it's 2 years before I can be put up for nomination as an IOM member. But I hope that someday, while I'm still a Texan, I can join you. And it's because organizations like TAMEST are really important. They can be a great influence, game changer in science and technology. And what's evident from this conference is that Texas is clearly, indisputably, a leader in cancer science with some of the finest research institutions, hospitals, and scientists in the world. And we at Susan G. Komen have made our own contributions to the landscape here in Texas, and we're very proud of that, having provided more than $90 million to Texas-based researchers for the work in breast cancer alone, and currently have 33 active research grants that we're supporting now. And we've also given $140 million through our 13 Texas affiliates to programs that educate, screen, treat breast cancer patients and survivors in this state, in our state. It's fitting that this conference is being held in Houston, where we've seen the power of investment in so many areas. Cancer research and treatment is clearly one of them. It's also here that we witness the incredible accomplishments of our space program. I remember as a schoolgirl being glued to the TV set and watching those rockets go up and seeing the first steps on the moon, and sharing in the pride that we all felt about America's role as a leader in science and technology. And I remain one of those people who firmly believes that when we as a nation put our minds to something, the possibilities are endless. We put a man on the moon in less than a decade, and we found a vaccine for polio and effective treatments for HIV/AIDS in about the same amount of time. We've made it possible to take computers that once filled entire warehouses and to put that same computing power in this. These experiences persuaded us as a nation that if we invested enough in resources and talents and coupled that with a declaration of national purpose, that success would come quickly and resoundingly. Now, this mindset permeates much of what we do as a nation. I'm reminded of a question when I was at the NIH testifying before Congress, a question that was asked of me by a U.S. senator, and I might add, not a Texas senator. How much do you need to cure Alzheimer's, he asked me. Followed up by a question that if we gave you $100 million, how long would it take? So it's this hurry-up mindset that informed our war on cancer. We declared this war 40 years ago with that same optimism and same sense of national purpose that we approached the putting a man on the moon. So it's not surprising that now, 40 years later, some feel discouraged that the war on cancer continues. Almost every day, somebody asks me why a cure for breast cancer hasn't been found. When I talk about having invested $847 million as an organization, again, why hasn't a cure been found? And when I start talking about the complexity of the disease, that it's a family of diseases, that there are pathways and genomics, people glaze over. And I've talked about the victories, how it's a much more survivable cancer these days after all of our investment. And they glaze over again and say, but yeah, why isn't there a cure? And I'm seeing this question asked frequently on a lot of social media, the blogs and Twitter, and this question comes up very, very frequently. So I fear that our optimism, despite our optimism, that we're also a society that's ready to move on to the next thing when the results of our first efforts don't bring the desired results quickly enough. We lose interest. We begin to question the value of those enterprises that are difficult, expensive, and where positive outcomes are not in our immediate grasp. And we certainly have become complacent of a topic like breast cancer, where people assume, okay, there's awareness about breast cancer, problem solved, okay, let's move on to the next issue. So there have been no magic bullets, as we all know, in the war against cancer. And to many, I think this indicates that we might have failed. Unfortunately, that mindset is finding its way into the public support for biomedical research. At the federal level, as we all feel, funding for biomedical research, including cancer research, has been virtually stagnant. And in real dollars, the federal government's investment in research spending is down about 20% over the last decade. I remember I was at NIH in the heady days of the doubling of the NIH budget, and then we saw the end in sight. And as we approached that, we started making plans for a soft landing, and we watched the budgets dwindle. And there was no such thing as a soft landing. And this began what I see as a dangerous trend, downward spiral of biomedical research investment. And whether it's a true story or it's an urban legend about the space race, there's a lot of truth to the phrase, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And about $130 billion what has been invested in biomedical research, and the last year that we have full data on that is 2012. Private foundations and other sources made up just 15% of that total, the rest being industry and the federal government. All of us here in this room understand the role that government can play and does play in funding innovative, high-risk research. I think we can all agree that without funding of biomedical research by the government, our goals in the war against cancer and other diseases will not only take longer, but might never be reached. These impacts are especially disturbing when we think about the next generation of researchers. We will lose, and in fact, we are losing, bright and innovative young scientists who feel that they don't have a future in science. I used to teach. I taught in the DC area, and mentored a lot of young scientists, and I saw them leave. They were discouraged. They move on to jobs with a stable pay and the pursuit of a bright, shiny object, perhaps at a startup, perhaps in industry, wearable tech. And some of them leave altogether. They leave science. And that is really a shame. We are creating our own brain drain here. In the meantime, we are bearing the almost intolerable social and economic costs of cancer here in the US and around the world. The American Cancer Society estimated that in 2009 alone, that the cost of cancer was $216 billion. and that included $87 billion in direct medical costs and an additional $130 billion in indirect costs of this disease, early mortality, and lost productivity. Cancer wreaks havoc on families, physically, psychologically, and financially. A recent study showed that about a third of breast cancer patients are unemployed 5 years after their diagnoses, not because they don't want to be employed, but in part because of the long-term effects of cancer treatment. And the number one cause of personal bankruptcy in this country is still attributable to medical costs. I had an experience last week myself where I have great medical insurance, and one of my children needs a new therapy, and the insurance has refused to pay for it. The cost is $150,000 a year for that one treatment for this child. And you know, it's for people who can't even afford co-payments on their insurance, if they have insurance, the costs can be staggering and very quickly lead to bankruptcy. But we simply cannot also quantify in economic terms the social impact of losing a parent, a mother or a father, or the economic potential of a person lost too early to cancer. So everyone in this room, whether you're an employee, an entrepreneur, an academic, a legislature, everyone has an interest in ensuring that we don't back off our mission against cancer. But how do we generate renewed interest and set realistic expectations in a war that's now almost as long as the Cold War and promises to take, indeed, much more time? And how do we do that in a society that often is more interested in Kim Kardashian than kinase inhibitors, or in Honey Boo Boo than Herceptin? I turned on the TV this morning, watched the national news, and leading off the news was Tom Brady and the deflated footballs, followed 10 minutes later by the situation in the Middle East. And that tells you something about where our interests and a priority are. So to change this, in my mind, we have to start at what may be a surprising place. That is, by ending the battlefield metaphors. We're right now in perhaps the middle age of the war on cancer. And that means it's the right thing to do, right time to do what grown-ups do. And that's to draw on the value of our experiences and accept what so many of us have learned through middle age, that things take longer than we thought, may be more difficult than we expected, and may not be accomplished in the time frames we want. But middle age also brings a perspective on those things that are worth doing anyway. And ending cancer is infinitely worth doing, not just as a moral imperative, but because the incredible human suffering from cancer, but as an economic imperative too, to end the financial and economic waste that cancer brings. And that's the kind of message we have to bring to the public. So more than changing the lexicon, we also need to stop framing the debate in terms of miracle cures. You may not know, but about 3 years ago, Susan G. Komen for the Cure changed its name to Susan G. Komen, precisely because of what was noted yesterday by one of the speakers, and that we have focused so much on cures that we haven't been able to really adequately tell people where and how we're making progress against cancer. So you've heard many examples of the progress that we've made over the past few days. Just 2 generations ago, a woman with breast cancer underwent a radical surgical procedure, and as one doctor put it, there was so little tissue left, so little left of her skin that you could see the heart beating through the chest. Today, women have far more options, surgical, non-surgical, and much more conservative approaches to treatment. 30 years ago, we evaluated the seriousness of breast cancer by the size of a lump. Today, thanks to research, we know that it's far more complex disease, as we said, a family of diseases, some easily treatable, some not so treatable, and not dependent on the size of the lump. These discoveries have led in just one generation to the development of new drugs and less invasive treatments. And I lost my notes. Okay. We've discovered so much more about genetic factors and risk factors in cancer, and we've learned so much, as you've heard, about the pathways that lead to this disease. And we're developing the treatments that are more easily understood and can prevent the spread, even vaccine approaches to preventing recurrences of cancer. But again, I mentioned some of these in a TV interview I was doing a couple months ago about new approaches, and I used the term vaccine approaches. And the lead on the evening news for the interview, the lead-in was vaccine on the horizon for breast cancer. And they said that perhaps within 2 years, I never said this, but I was quoted as saying within 2 years we'll have a vaccine against breast cancer. Again, looking for that bright, shiny object. But the story is that we've made progress, and you've heard about it over the past few days. Today, the 5-year survival rates for early-stage breast cancer are at 99%. That's remarkable. And death rates across all cancers are improving. So we have a lot that we can be proud of. A lot of progress has been made. So we should be celebrating these as victories, not in the war against cancer, but bringing us closer to our mission to end breast cancer. And we have to be mindful that the war metaphor only goes so far, because when I speak with women, there are 40,000 women and some men who die of breast cancer each year in the United States alone. And when I speak to them, they don't like being told to fight. They don't like the war metaphors, because if they lose, and the people with metastatic diseases are living with the disease every day, they're not looking at cure. And if they lose, then it feels that they didn't do something right. They didn't eat right. They didn't get the right treatment. They didn't see the right doctors. So they bristle at the characterization of themselves as fighters in this war. So we shouldn't be discouraged. I think we can see over the talks we heard over the past few days that we're making progress. And we've made this progress in just a generation. And this disease has had a head start of several thousand years. So the science is exciting, and there's so much more progress to be made. And I expect that we'll see a lot of that progress with the new immunotherapy approaches, all kinds of different things in the next 10 or 15 years. But we have to encourage our lawmakers to increase the pace of cancer research and all biomedical research. And this must, again, be a national imperative. So it's a crafty and complicated disease, or set of diseases that we're dealing with. But we, again, have the ingenuity and need the resources to make progress. And this work, as we heard, is occurring here in Texas and in the nation and across the world. And the federal government must help keep this progress going. And we, in the non-governmental sector, have a role to play in finding ways to fill that gap in research. And this is something that you heard from Margaret Kripke yesterday afternoon. At Komen, for us, this has meant that we have picked up the pace of investment in our young researchers, even as we fund a number of established researchers like the ones several Komen-funded researchers you heard about from in the past few days. Half of our portfolio this year went to early career researchers, so that maybe they won't have to wait until age 44 for their first independent grant, which is now the average age of getting an R01. So my goal is to increase Komen's commitment by 30% in this coming year, and to do our part to stop the brain drain and to stop young researchers from becoming an endangered species. And we need all of your help in doing that. We make these investments in research. We must do everything in our power as employers, as scientists, philanthropists, academics, and technology experts to ease the tremendous social and economic costs that this disease is taking today. Komen has invested, as you heard, $1.8 billion in health programs and services to fill the gaps for the uninsured, the underinsured, low-income women, those most vulnerable. We pay for medical supplies, we pay for surgeries, treatment, screening, insurance co-payments, and we even pay for transportation, child care, and services that are needed to keep people in treatment, food on the table, and sometimes rent. We've established programs across the nation and in 30 countries around the world for underserved women. We have initiated patient navigation throughout all of our affiliates across the country and across the world. Because while we wait for the cures and the treatment, there are people suffering today, and we need to address that suffering. So all of us who are engaged with TAMEST can help ease the real-world impacts of the disease, even as we support the development and investment in research. Cancer still has the upper hand, and we're gaining on it. One day we'll win what we called the war, and it's an enterprise that will continue to take time, money, effort, and patience. Every failure, every blind alley, and every breakthrough gives us an opportunity to pursue those things that aren't working, to understand why they're not working, and to pursue those things that are. So we're at an important crossroads in this nation against cancer. The 4 decades since the declaration of the war against cancer is just, as I said, a tiny sliver of time. And in that sliver of time, we've significantly advanced our understanding of cancer and improved our ability to treat and to care for people with these diseases. And with that as our foundation, in the words of Winston Churchill, we must never, never, never give up. And I, for one, don't intend to. And I hope and I expect that my feelings are shared by this group. Finding the ways to put an end to cancer will come from people like those of you in this room who care about science, who care about your neighbors, and who understand that the things worth doing won't come easily. Thank you.